This is Steve Balch, Director of the Institute for the Study of Western Civilization, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first of this year's Institute Encounters, in which we talk to the distinguished speakers who are coming in to address a large Texas Tech audience. And we're going to have an especially large Texas Tech audience today because today, September 17th, is Constitution Day. And around the country, various institutions will be celebrating at various universities and colleges. I think none, however, will be as fortunate as ours, because we today have a man who not only has made as part of his life work the study of the Constitution, but has been interested in developing a greater public consciousness of what the foundation of our Constitution is. And so let me introduce Dr. Hadley Arkes, who until very recently was Edward N. Ney Professor of Jurisprudence at Amherst College for 49 years, I believe, and is now the president of the James Wilson Institute on Natural Rights and the Constitution and the American Founding. He's also the author of a good many books on Constitution, natural rights, and public policy. But I think having the man himself here is a lot better than just reciting the list of his books. So let me ask you, you're sort of entering onto a kind of new chapter in your life in moving down from Amherst to Washington and being able to give all of your time to the work of the James Wilson Institute. What do you think the foremost mission of the James Wilson Institute is? What is it all about? What project does it represent?
Well, I think the main thing is to try to restore the furnishings of mind, not only the understandings, but the furnishings of mind, the way the American founders thought about these questions, tracing their judgments back to those very anchoring axioms of our rights and the moral ground on which they're making this Constitution. So it's I was citing the other day Lincoln's line about the Constitution. This must be something, he said, wholly antecedent to the positive law. It must be depending wholly on the natural right of a people to determine the terms of their own governance. Now, when we do that, we're trying to draw people back to those deep premises on which you have a regime of law in the first place. And I know why people are mystified by the notion of natural right. They're not understanding is, are there certain rights that you have that arise from nature? Now, Aristotle raised this. He raised it in the most common sense way. You distinguish things that are distinctly human nature, by separating human things from the things that are either subhuman or superhuman. And so, as Aristotle said, anyone who's outside of a political order, who doesn't need the restraint of law, is not open to the teaching of law, there must be either something beneath the law or above it, a beast or a god. And as the American founders understood the matter this way, no man is by nature the ruler of other men in the way that man is by nature the ruler of dogs and horses. And if you ever see a situation in which some men are ruling over others, that state of affairs cannot arise from nature. It must arise from consent of the governed. So as I tell people, even in this age of animal rights, we don't find people signing labor contracts with their horses or cows, or seeking the informed consent for their household pets before they authorize surgery on them. We continue to think that those beings who can give and understand reasons over matters of right and wrong deserve to be ruled with a rendering of reasons.
So would it be correct to say that the starting point of a natural law, natural rights analysis is the recognition that what makes humans unique is that they are rational creatures?
That's what's behind Aristotle's whole account of what political life is. It's life governed by law. There's no other creature who can understand what it means to respect a commitment or an obligation that runs counter to his own inclinations or interests. So only one kind of creature can frame propositions and and claim the respect of people to promises they've made, or to respect a law that commands their attention and their respect. I've used the example of a visitor coming in from London, say, lands in New York. And we know that we don't have to look at his passport before we protect him from a lawless assault on the street. We don't think his claim to that kind of protection depends at all on his citizenship. But the same fellow can't take himself over that day to the City College of New York and expect to be enrolled at that subsidized rate of tuition, or even to vote. We have an understanding of certain rights that emerge only in certain enclaves, like the right to use the squash courts at Amherst College, the right to get books out of the town library.
And where do those contextualized rights derive from?
So the contextualized rights from the special settings. Are you a member? Are you a member of the Amherst community? Are you enrolled? Are you a member of the faculty? Do you have any claim to use those facilities? Are you a citizen of New York? Do you have residence here? Can you claim to get access to the university? As opposed to those rights that don't seem to depend on these local enclaves. Now, ordinary people understand that, and we had these demonstrations a while back of people saying about people here illegally, illegal residents, claiming a right to become citizens. Well, they're not citizens now. So the rights they're claiming can't be rights that flow to them from their citizenship. They must be invoking some body of right and wrong that does not depend on local law. So it must be some sense of, are there certain rights that arise from me just by virtue of being a human being that you'd be obliged to respect? Well, whether you've got it right or wrong, ordinary folks have a kind of a common sense understanding of these things. There's nothing alien about that notion. People understand readily that why that my human rights aren't threatened if I can't use the squash courts at Amherst College or get access right now to the City College of New York. So people, as a common sense matter, they understand these gradations. They also understand when their liberty, their freedom is restricted with or without justification. You know, I'm blocked by the fire department from walking down the street to my apartment in Washington because they're fighting a fire. Well, my liberty's been impeded, but I don't have a sense that my rights have been violated. My natural rights, my constitutional. Why? Because it's a restriction that is patently justified for my safety, the safety of others. So as people make a mistake when they identify natural rights with my right to life. The natural right to life has never meant a right to life everlasting, that the government cannot put us in harm's way in defense of the country. Any law, traffic light, will impede my liberty to move. Laws of taxation will draw upon my property. So the question is always, is my freedom being restricted, my property taken, with or without justification? Now, I see a youngster on Connecticut Avenue in Washington about to go to the subway with his bike. I said, my gosh, you could do that? And he said, yes, but not during the rush hour. He understands that it's entirely reasonable to restrain him from doing that at a time when the subways are crowded. He doesn't think his rights have been violated. See, my point of this, Steve, is that you have all these terms, but it's always going to, these claims of rights, it will always turn on the underlying judgment, whether you're restricting things with justification. Why are you taking blood from his arm? Because he's just been in an accident? We want to know if he's been under the influence of alcohol when he's been drunk. In all these instances, is it a reasonable search, an unreasonable search? We're always drawn to make these judgments about the restrictions that are justified. And when we're doing that, we're drawing on these deep principles of judgment that ordinary folk employ every day.
So one of the reasons that our being uniquely rational creatures, at least on this earth, entitles us to be treated in a way that respects our rights is that, first of all, I suppose, we can understand the nature of rights and understand the rights that not only pertain to us but to others. We're rational. But I think you're also suggesting that being rational gives us a kind of moral claim on having rights and other people recognizing our rights. Do I have you correctly on that? That there's it's not merely that, you know, an intelligent computer might or might not have rights, but an intelligent computer would not have a moral claim of the same kind that we have. Am I getting you correctly there?
No, absolutely right, because the life of moral judgment is life that's bound up with the giving of reasons. Well, when you're making these moral judgments, we're moving beyond statements of personal likes or dislike. I like it, I dislike it. We're talking about the things that are right or wrong more generally or universally for others as well as yourself. Now, if I'm simply telling somebody, I like the spinach, I'm simply expressing my personal taste. The fact that I like it does not entail the judgment that anybody else should like it, and still less would entail the judgment that I could make it compulsory. But when we're saying we have this thing, a policy, that we are ready to impose on people, whether it's for Obamacare or a military draft, we can be asked questions we wouldn't be asked if we're simply expressing our personal taste, because we are imposing this now. So it's entirely reasonable now, in the presence of a moral judgment, for people to ask, well, what are your reasons? To what standards can you appeal to explain to me why that is reasonable and valid for me as well as for you?
Let's talk about some of the policy implications.
Okay.
So a moment ago you raised the question of someone coming to the United States as an immigrant,
Right.
And say immediately wanting the right to vote or run for office.
Right.
How would a natural rights analysis look at an issue of that sort? And of course it is an issue right now in the United States. So applying it to the American debate over the status of immigrants, both legal and illegal, who come to the United States, what does the natural rights analysis bring to that, an understanding of the questions involved in that debate?
Well, the first thing you have to know is it's not a hotel you're checking in and out of, right? You simply say, I'm obeying the house rules. If you simply want to be here to visit, you know, then you obey the house rules, you know, as you would in a hotel. But you want citizenship. I mean, citizenship means membership in a political order with a definite character, what we call a regime. So one of the first things you'd ask is, well, do you really accept the principles of this regime? Well, for example, you want to be a citizen of the United States. It becomes legitimate to ask people, are you prepared to accept and preserve a regime of citizens with a vote? That is, look, we've seen instances. We saw it in Germany in 1932, where people were going to the polls, acting like a people in a democratic society, and yet willing to vote for a party that removes a regime of free elections and strips people around them of their civil and even natural rights. So you can ask people, you understand that you want to be a citizen, that you may not, you should be obliged not to vote for a castroid party, or a party that would end a regime of free. Do you understand that you're to be committed as a citizen of this place means a moral commitment to preserve this kind of regime? You commit yourself not to vote for a party that would end a regime of elections, not to vote for a party that would strip people around you of their rights to have that particular regime. The notion of the regime, the character regime, is a thoroughly moral question about the terms on which we live.
What does that say about the continuing citizenship of someone who's already a citizen but wishes to support a party of that kind?
What it says is that he's really lost. He's in a state of disaffection. We've seen many homegrown traitors, people who are willing to sell out their countries. Do we
extend ordinary civil liberties to political parties that want to undo the regime and their
supporters? Well, see, at a certain point, we understood we had a communist control. We say that choice should not be on the ballot. That the citizen ought to understand for himself, but we should also make it clear that a party whose press is on the ballot would turn the ballot into a question, shall democratic government continue after next Thursday. It has no place on the ballot. But the sense of that has disappeared. You know, when we were youngsters, there was a clear sense of it. You can have a Communist Control Act, and you understand you couldn't have a Nazi party on the ballot or a Communist party on the ballot. That's perfectly compatible with the moral premises of it. Now, the fact that we don't do it today doesn't mean that the issue has disappeared. It simply means that you have people who are just less attentive than they've been in the past to the moral grounds of which their own freedom rests. Now, you raise a really an apt question, because I've often thought, you know, there are people who are born here, raised here, and just as we ask newcomers just to sort of look into this matter, are you really ready to raise your hand and pledge allegiance to this regime? Do you know something about its institutions? And people who come here from abroad usually have a clear sense of why they want to be here. They identify this place as a place of freedom. They have a clear sense of it. Sometimes I think we ought to have a common ritual of citizenship, so that we ask anybody, people, kids when they turn 18 or to make the question, make the decision. Are you really committed to the premises of this political order? And if not, perhaps you shouldn't be voting. So maybe you should simply, you know, accept your residence here as a resident, as a legal resident, but not to sort of claim rights of voting. You know, we could be a
Athenian metic or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But I would say, treat everyone on the same plane. Take this all seriously.
You know, right now in Europe, we see lots and lots of people who are trying to get into Europe from war-torn regions in the Middle East and elsewhere. People who would like to live in Germany if they could, or some other country with high living standards. Now, some of these folks, not all obviously, unfortunately, but some of these folks are probably prepared to accept the code of democratic life and democratic government. If someone has that philosophical allegiance, they'll make good citizens, and wants to come into a country of which they're not already a citizen, does that country still have the power to say, no, we somehow think you don't fit in on other counts, we don't want you. You can't become a citizen or even a resident here. How would that square with natural rights thinking?
Well, I think what I said before, I think would suggest that the main criteria we would need would be the moral criteria. You know, if we're trying to calculate how many jobs would be taking away from people who are here, that's an iffy matter. That's quite speculative, and people coming here could be...
Is that a proper prudential consideration in decision making?
Well, it's not as firm, I think, as the moral question of are you prepared to live under these laws? Are you interested instead of creating a separate enclave, say of Sharia law, not governed by the laws of this country? That's a different kind of a question. It's quite reasonable for the Germans and others to ask, do you accept the moral terms of this? We're trying to preserve these moral terms could be satisfied with people who look a lot different from the way we look. And of course, the United States, America was made with a sense of
we don't have a particular look here.
No particular look here. As Lincoln said, of those people the families who came later, they have an idea that nevertheless this country was about them. They said the Declaration, all men are created equal, that was the electric cord that connected the generations. Now, you know, remember at the Constitutional Convention there was a question, why are you going to let poor people in? You know, Ben Franklin said, look, I thought this place was a sanctuary where poor people who can't make it up through the rigid structures of another country could come here and have the world open to them and be free to make it, to make something of themselves and to contribute. And so I
was recently reading online I think it was in a thread about immigration policy. A Swedish national weighed in. He was talking about the situation in Europe. And someone was saying, well, if you want immigrants, certainly one of the things you should insist on is that they assimilate. And this fellow responded by saying, well, here in Sweden, we don't really think assimilation is necessary, but we do want them to integrate. And I thought, while he didn't spell out exactly what that meant, I thought what he probably meant is obey the law, respect the rights of others. Register to vote and think of yourself as having an obligation to the polity as a whole. But you don't necessarily have to become Swedes, as Swedishness has traditionally been understood. You can continue to have your own religion, to associate with your own people, preferentially, to wear your, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, he was imagining that would work, and maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Do you think that a country receiving immigrants should be able to convey to them that it's not just enough for you to kind of obey the law, which of course we expect you to do, but we really do want you in most respects, we don't care what you look like, but we really do want you in most respects to be like the majority, the traditional majority always has been. So you may have been an Iraqi, but we expect you to try, and certainly your children and grandchildren, to try to conform to Swedish norms. Is that an appropriate demand or not?
Well, sure. A country may be trying to preserve a certain kind of character, and it's a morally defensible character. I said, well, how significant is it? Do you have to share the local cuisine here? Do you have to share this passion for this?
I've been going to all the barbecue places since I came down here to Texas. I'm trying very hard.
That's right, but even if you can't quite summon those, even if you have this deep passion for coq au vin, and you have to eat it secretly, I think, well, that should be getting in the way. But you raise another question. You touch another question that does, I think, runs deep. It's not part of what we've been seeing recently. There's the concern about the refugees coming in. And of course, it's scaring people to say, here the flood of people we don't know, the Islamic background, we don't know what kind of demands they'll bring. Now, remember, this question looked to us quite different at a time when people understood there were gradations of rights, of human rights, the rights that flow in human rights that flow from citizenship, and also political rights. Now, one thing that brings it back from people of our generation, the concern about, during the Second World War, of taking in Jewish refugees when Europe became a killing ground. And there may be a small Latin American country, Catholic country, wanting to take Jews in, but not wanting to change the character of the country as a Catholic country. And
the Dominican Republic, actually.
Dominican Republic.
Did that, yeah.
Republic. That's what I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
of. Okay. Now, we used to be able to understand that we could take people in just to respect their natural rights, their right not to have their lives taken simply because of their religion. Right? We could take them in, and we wouldn't necessarily have to make them citizens. Just the way, say, the Palestinians are not given citizenship in the Arab countries that house them. See,
Hasn't worked out all that well.
yeah, I know, but look, remember in this country, in the aftermath of the Civil War, we had, I'm trying to think of that losing these names, the senator from Delaware, and they came forth with the 14th Amendment. He said, well, wait a minute, you said that we're simply voting in the 13th Amendment to remove involuntary servitude. Now you're telling me that we have to give citizenship to these? Are you sure these people are in a condition to receive citizenship? Now, we used to raise the question about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, removing involuntary servitude, then providing citizenship for the freed slaves, and then 15th Amendment, voting rights. And we used to raise the question, why were these three discrete steps taken over 5 years, rather than simply 3 paragraphs of the same amendment? And the reason was that they're seen as 3 discrete steps. The fact that we recognize somebody's freedom does not necessarily mean that they really are in a condition to accept citizenship and bear the obligations of citizenship. And there are many people who are citizens here who are not yet fit to be voters. You share political power with them. See? So it's no, they're youngsters here. They don't have the vote. They have to, you have to grow up to claim the vote. It's curious that at the same time this was going on, the same gradations were in play with Jews in Europe, as you may recognize. Some cases, Jews didn't receive citizenship in Europe until after black people received citizenship in this country. The French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, that simply meant for the Jews emancipation. It did recognize that they could not be expelled from the territory without some kind of due process, but it didn't grant citizenship. So you find citizenship coming for Jews sometime in the 1870s in Europe. The gradations were there. Now, let's say if we had a world in which those understandings were held as they were in the past, then the whole matter of the flood of refugees coming in right now would lose some of its moral edge or anxiety. You can say, well, we're taking in some people to rescue them. They may want to go home after that things are settled in Syria. If there's a better regime in Syria, they may want to go home. We're simply extending rights of residence to keep people out of the storm, right? And we're doing that in a generous way, without knowing yet quite whether we're ready to accept them on a condition of citizenship. And we'll have to learn more about them and their own commitments, their own understanding of how they fit into this place before we make a decision on citizenship.
So an existing community set up on the basis of natural and civic rights for its own citizens can fairly make judgments with respect to prospective immigrants along these lines.
As they make judgments with everyone else. We decide that if you're a felon, if you're somebody who have established a record of breaking the laws, perhaps you shouldn't be in a position to be a voter helping to make laws for other people, which is say citizenship and the vote is something that is freighted at all times with moral significance. If you understand, it's a polity, not a hotel. Right? If you understand, there's a moral significance that attaches to the polity, to the political order, that doesn't exactly attach to residence in a hotel. Then we can make these moral demands on people, and then we can say, well, we ought to speak the same language. We ought to be able to carry on a discourse among one another. And yeah, there's certain things we'd expect you to know. We expect you to know something about the Constitution and the laws, and also just we want to have a sense of your own understanding. Are you ready to preserve the rights of people around you and respect those rights?
So to kind of change the policy domain here,
yeah.
You've also been a very active voice on behalf of the rights of the unborn.
Right.
Can you now? Some might say, after all, a fetus is not yet capable of reasoning, and hence shouldn't be kind of considered to have the same moral stature. How would you respond to that?
Well, yes, right. A fetus should not be managing your stock portfolio. And he may be a potential outfitter, a potential lawyer, but he's not a potential human being. He's been a human being at all stages. Even my liberal friends should know that when we're talking about a homicide, the question is irrelevant. It's really a matter of irrelevance as to how large the person is, how articulate he is, and so on. You've seen me this. I use that example of Lincoln's example of the model of how do you deliberate about why do you consider black people less than human beings who have a claim to their freedom? They're less intelligent than you. I'll be aware the next white man who comes along more intelligent than you may rightly enslave you. They're darker than you are. The next white man with a complexion even lighter than yours may enslave you. In other words,
those are things that Southerner might have said, and Lincoln is.
Yeah. You imagine himself engaged in a conversation with others. And the upshot was, and of course there are many Southerners who did think it through this way and decided to emancipate their slaves. I remember that Kenneth Stamp had this letter from one fellow saying, if this was slavery, if this were such a good thing, I'd be willing to have my own family in this condition, but I'm not. Okay. Now, so we just use the same mode of reasoning. That offspring in the womb is human at all stages. It doesn't go through, we're well past Aristotelian biology. It is an animal until it becomes something rational.
Is that what Aristotle calls
Yeah,
it?
it goes to something in an animal stage,
Uh-huh.
then it goes to something. So we're past that. Now we know that from that zygotal dot, this made a big impression on me years ago, that when you and I were no larger than that zygotal dot, the size of a period at the end of a sentence. Everything was there in our genetic makeup, the likely height, weight, and this allergies.
So this is a scientific judgment.
It's a weave of scientific judgment. It's a weave of saying, all right, what's the principal ground on which you regard that offspring of the womb as anything less than a human being? And if it isn't anything less than a human being, then the kind of grounds we need to justify the taking of that life should be in the same plane as the grounds we require of. It may be legitimate to take life in self-defense in other cases, but you'd say, well, is it, well, the presence of another child will strain this. Well, the psyche of the family could be strained by the addition of aged parents to the home, of a 13-year-old who was already the terror of the household, So you say, you wouldn't allow anyone else to be killed for the sake of convenience. If you knew that somebody had Down syndrome, that would not take it as a ground for ending his life. So we simply say that once you understand that this offspring is human from this first moment, that its human standing does not depend on its height and weight or how articulate he is, then the grounds you need to take his life.
But it does depend on its potential as a rational actor, does it not?
But the potential depends on his potential as a lawyer or an outfielder, but he's never a potential human being.
Mm-hmm.
See? And so I've sought to get at this in the most modest way by seeing if we can protect the child who survived the abortion.
Mm-hmm.
But the interest
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we had a case in 1977 called Floyd versus Anders of a child who survived an abortion for 21 days, undergone a surgery, died, and the question was there an obligation to preserve the life of that child?
Had they killed it, or had
No, it just died,
Mm-hmm.
but the people just left it alone.
Really? Mm-hmm.
And as we have now,
It was not treated.
It's not treated. It undergone
Was it fed?
I don't recall all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a serious question raised about, did you give this child as much care as you
Mm-hmm.
give any other
Mm-hmm.
child?
Mm-hmm.
Or the fact that the parents did not want the child,
Mm-hmm.
that weigh in on the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Judge Hainsworth, Clement Hainsworth, you may remember from Nixon days.
It's a failed Supreme Court nominee.
Yeah, nominee. And he held, no, this is not a child protected by the law. This was a fetus marked for termination, which some people understood to mean the right to an abortion is the right to an effective abortion or a dead child. Well, people can come up with these theories about what's not really human yet,
Mm-hmm.
so it flies in the face of what embryology tells us. What we're offering here again is a weave of embryology and principled reasoning. No faith. It's not a matter of religious argument, not a matter of evoking my belief that it's human.
Don't have to believe in a soul or anything.
Don't have to
like
believe in a soul or anything else. Right, exactly right, Steve. So we use this as a means of teaching, and we said, look, we're going to come back to you to ask what's different about that same child 5 minutes before, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months before. And now if we don't convince you, well, we don't convince you, but at least from that vast volume of 1.2 million abortions each year, we might rescue a handful of lives. And we had Jill Stanek testifying. We did the bill in 2000 and 2002, when it was enacted. And Jill Stanek blew the whistle on the live birth abortion in Christ Hospital, Oaklawn, Illinois, where the child was simply delivered whole and put in a refuse room to die. And she got on the radio after we passed this bill, and nurses were calling from different parts of the country saying, we've been doing that in our hospital for years. There's far more of this going on than we understood even at the time. And then we had the killings in Philadelphia of Kermit Gosnell. Now, one of the interesting things that came out of that, I've just heard from a friend who's working on a book on it, was that the police were summoned to Gosnell's abattoir there, were brought there because he was suspected of issuing prescriptions without an authorization. Then they got there and they saw this bloody place. Something else is going on here. So one of the cops, I gather, called his supervisors. You know, there's something bizarre with abortions and killing. And the supervisor said, "That's not your business. You were sent there to investigate these drugs. This is an abortion." And the sense was placed that if this is an abortion, it is constitutionally protected. So people raise the question, well, if you have a child who survives an abortion and someone kills it, it's a matter of homicide under local law, unless something has supervened. The understanding we're dealing now with a constitutional right that is taking this out of the hands of the local authorities. So one rationale for doing this was to alert people to the fact that there's something of moral significance going on here.
So when this bill passed, you had kind of been the inspiration for the bill.
I had put it in the debating kit for the first George Bush in 1988, never used it. And I was hoping that if the Webster case came along in 1989, it looked as though they're going to return the issue of abortion to the political arena. So I had this draft in which I would have had the president say, look, this matter has been under the governance of courts for so long that we need a conversation before we start legislating again. The other side tells us, insists that abortion is not infanticide, which means they're willing to protect the child at some point. So why don't we invite them to tell us the point at which they'll start protecting the child? And we could move from there. If nothing else, well, what about birth? Child is out. No one's plausibly arguing as to whether you're dealing with a human being now, right? No one's invoking some kind of strange theory to tell us why this thing is not, this child is not human. Why don't we begin there? Well, he never used that. But that's essentially the argument we were using in getting this thing going. But when we did that bill, Charles Kennedy, who was the chairman of the subcommittee of the Constitution, decided that we should strip the bill of penalties just to make it a pure teaching bill when we're planting premises. He wanted to avert a veto from Bill Clinton. Well, I didn't think we needed it because I thought Bill Clinton would sign that bill. But we did it that way. And of course what that meant was that there's really no practical way of enforcing this law.
It was passed unanimously, I gather.
What happened was, the interesting part about it is some of our allies, like Henry Hyde, couldn't see what we'd gain by putting in something so moderate that even pro-choice people would vote. I said, well, that's a good place to begin. We'll meet them on, they can meet us on this ground and we can work back from there. Well, the day we came out with that bill, I led the testimony in the House. Either it was the National Abortion Rights Act, I can't remember what they called it, I think the National Organization of Women, and the feminists were out there in opposition to this bill to preserve the child who's born alive. And people on my side just couldn't believe this. Doug Johnson from Natural Right to Life was just lit up. Can you believe they're doing this? But what that indicated was the other side, our opponents, understood this bill better than my own allies because they understood the principle that lay at the heart of the thing. And Jerry Nadler, the congressman from Greenwich Village.
Is it Greenwich also? Okay.
I think Jerry's in Greenwich Village. And Jerry had them all around him. He said, look, don't make us vote against this. It's just too embarrassing. It's a very modest bill. There's no enforcement mechanism. just. And so Jerry got the Democrats just to hold back, not to oppose it. And he was complaining about this is like a device to sort of lure us into doing something embarrassing, and it's anti-choice. But still, got all the Democrats to either vote for it or withhold their opposition.
Has it been tested in the courts?
No, of course not. It has been challenged because it hasn't strictly been enforced, because it could be enforced only by removing federal funds, which is why we have now returned to the matter, and it's going to the floor.
Remove federal funds from a hospital, say, is that
right?
what you do?
Right. But It's a very complicated way of doing things.
But doesn't it also say by implication that state laws about homicide are now applicable? The federal government has no problem with state laws on homicide being applicable to those situations.
Of course. And it may alert people to the fact. It's just this, you know, the old argument about civil rights in the 1940s where, you know, Felix Frankfurter saying, what are you doing prosecuting these people for sheriffs, local sheriffs, for beating up and killing their, you know, the federal government can't issue, you know, treat this as a criminal matter and give this guy a capital punishment. This is better handled by local people who have serious penalties. But the presence of the federal law alerted people to the fact that you've got a serious problem here that does deserve the attention and concern of local authorities. So in the same way here, that you could, it took a couple of my former...
Your strong impression is that this still happens.
Oh, yes.
Children are left to die,
yes,
or actively killed.
Oh, yes. As Jill Stanek thinks, this may be the method of choice for many people because no instruments are introduced into the body of the mother. The child is simply delivered whole and put aside. The so-called live birth abortion. So our move has been to return and now provide the penalties to believe to a new plane of seriousness. And remember, when we did this in the first place, we talked about Jerry Nadler inducing his Democratic colleagues to hold back their opposition. And this came at a time when the Democrats were still in control of the Senate, and it was the Deputy Majority Leader, Harry Reid of Nevada, who brought this thing in. And we gathered, I was invited to the signing of the bill, and Karl Rove came up and he said, Hadley, why do you think the Democrats allowed that bill to get to the floor? And I said, what's your reading of it, Karl? He said, they must have thought that somebody out there really cared about this. They'd be held responsible. I said, well, there they go. They started imputing more seriousness to our side than we did. I don't think anybody on the Republican side would have drawn down any political capital for the sake of rescuing that bill. Now, at the same time, the only Democrat of national standing who opposed this move was the state senator in Illinois, Barack Obama, who managed to kill the same bill in the Senate of Illinois.
He was the leading figure?
He was the leading figure. He killed it as chairman of one committee. It's just the beginning of an attempt to roll back Roe versus Wade, of course. You know, yeah. But still, even if you say that, you say, for the sake of preserving Roe versus Wade, you're really ready to kill even the child who survived. So what we're doing now is bringing it back. We're raising this question. We'll raise this question to the Democrats who are still there, who are left. Say, look, you all vote either condemn this thing or you withheld your opposition. You agree that this is a heinous thing. And 80% of the country in the samples think that the killing done by Gosnell in Philadelphia was heinous, that it deserved a serious punishment. Okay, so we're coming back to the Democrats. You all voted. You either voted for this or held your up. What kind of a penalty do you think is merited? Like, tell us what you think it is. Is it as serious as a moving violation of traffic, or tell us what you think it is? And remind people that the most important purpose, the figure of national significance who opposed this thing in the first place is the one now sitting in the White House.
So let me kind of conclude by asking you a more general question. What do you think what you want to do is provide citizens with a more solid intellectual and moral ground in their effort to understand what rights actually pertain to. Are you optimistic? This is a kind of effort in argumentation, in marketing, so to speak, put it crudely. Are you optimistic about its success, looking at America today?
Well, whether we make it or not, I think we're obliged to make the argument. It's worth doing. In principle, it's worth doing. What's Churchill's line? You can't guarantee success. You could only guarantee deserving it. We don't know what the prospects. I think it's a tougher thing now than when you and I were youngsters. There seems to be more in the air. You know, we came into the world when we had on every street corner is a sign of people in the neighborhood who were in the service. You know, national sacrifice, rationing, and so on. And now there's been, under peacetime, there's been a kind of erosion, the kind of forgetting of what the grounds are. You know, that line of Harry Joffe's about playing upon Lincoln's line about, can you cabin slavery to black? If I'm indifferent to slavery, I'm indifferent to the terms in which some human beings are simply shifted into the category of non-rights-bearing beings. We simply shift the label. That's not a human being, it's a nigger. That's not a human being, it's a fetus. By simple shift of label is you shift people out of the level of rights-bearing beings. And he says, so the line was, I think as Harry had it, that you can't be indifferent to the terms of principle in which you remove human beings from the circle of rights-bearing beings without being indifferent to the very grounds of your own freedom. And what a free people should respect in the first instances are the premises of their own freedom. So I discovered, you know that when, remember one student of mine, Chinese extraction, who grew up in Florida, freshman, came up and said, look, I've been here all my life. I lived here all my life. Why is Lincoln new to me? We find that the founders and Lincoln are new to people. They want to be on their side. There's something very compelling about them. It's never out of season, I think, to teach them. The writing is elegant and it's moving. And the only hope is for restoring this is to, well, the great advantage of restoring it is that we have the writings. I mean, I remember once doing something of Lincoln's in a dinner, his speech in the aftermath of Dred Scott, he's running, you see the movement of Lincoln's mind, as Jacques Berzon had it. And as I was doing this, the waiters were stopping in there. Somebody pointed out the waiters. You notice when you're doing that, the waiters stopped in their tracks. There's still something about Lincoln's soul that will sort of take hold of the room, the room. So we say, look, we have one advantage here. We have these powerful writings, and it's never out of season to go back to them, to read them anew. And it's remarkable as to how you may find these diamonds in the rough, youngsters for the first time, first one in their family to go to college, and they see that, and they're drawn to this. So this, we have to cling to the hope of renewal.
So as Lincoln said at Gettysburg, hoping for a new birth,
of freedom,
you're trying to, today, give freedom that new birth once again.
Well,
maybe it needs a new birth every century or so.
Well, as you've been doing it with National Association of Scholars, you've devoted your life to this now, Steve. And we've been in this constant project of trying to restore to another generation the understanding of Western civilization and the gifts of Western civilization. And, it's like, raise the question, this Pythagorean theorem, was it about, we're sure that Pythagoras had all the advantages of a tradition of Greek mathematics. Was this a theorem about Greek triangles? No. Okay. So the premises are there, the principles are there. It's a gift to the larger world. The fact that it was articulated in the West did not mean it was confined to the West. It was our gift to a world civilization.
Well, you're one of our gifts.
All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.